The office was an empty expanse of shadows and echoes, its usual hustle replaced by an eerie quiet that seemed to stretch endlessly. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, their cold glow casting harsh shadows on the walls. I stared at my computer screen, its bright light a stark contrast to the dimly lit room around me. I was alone, save for the occasional creak of the building and the distant hum of machinery. Most people had left hours ago, but I needed to finish this project. The deadline loomed, and my only company was the growing pile of paperwork on my desk and the creeping sense of isolation that seemed to seep into my bones. The office had always felt large, but tonight, with the desks empty and the chairs pushed in, it felt positively cavernous. I tried to shake off the unease gnawing at me. This was just another late night at the office, a routine that I was all too familiar with. I had worked alone in this building before, and nothing bad had ever happened. So why did tonight feel different? The silence was oppressive, almost as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting. I could almost hear the faint rustle of papers, though I knew it was just my imagination. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, moving in a practiced rhythm as I tried to focus on the task at hand. I glanced at the clock. 10:15 p.m. I had been here for hours, and the minutes seemed to drag on. Each tick of the clock seemed louder in the stillness, echoing through the empty office. I forced myself to concentrate, my eyes scanning over the figures on the screen, my mind racing to keep up with the demands of the project. The occasional creak of the building became more pronounced, and I couldn't help but glance around every now and then, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. It was probably nothing, just the building settling. But the quiet made everything seem more pronounced, more unsettling. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself it was just nerves. After all, the office had never been anything but a workplace. The creaks and groans of the building were probably nothing more than the result of age and wear. Yet, despite my best efforts, the sense of unease grew stronger with every passing minute. Shaking my head, I forced my focus back to the screen. I had a job to do, and I couldn't afford to let my imagination run wild. I took a deep breath, determined to finish what I had started. The project was too important to let a little thing like fear get in the way. As I continued to work, the quiet seemed to close in around me, the isolation palpable. But I pushed through, driven by a sense of determination and the looming deadline. The office might have been empty and silent, but I was here, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone distract me from my work. The office's monotony was broken by the sudden flicker of the overhead light. At first, it was just a quick stutter, hardly noticeable. But then the light began to blink more frequently, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls and floor. It was as if the darkness was alive, reaching out with spidery fingers. I frowned and glanced up from my work, irritated by the distraction. The light had always been a bit temperamental, but this was new. Each flicker seemed to amplify the silence, making the office feel even more cavernous and empty. Shadows stretched and twisted, playing tricks on my eyes and making the familiar room seem strange and unsettling. I sighed, pushing back my chair with a loud scrape that echoed through the room. I needed to fix this. There was no way I could concentrate with the lights behaving like this. I got up and walked over to the light fixture, my footsteps loud in the silence. The buzzing of the light was almost deafening, and I could feel the faint vibrations through the metal of the fixture. As I stood on tiptoe to inspect it, the light flickered again, casting an eerie glow on the rows of empty desks. I reached up and tapped the fixture lightly, hoping to jostle it back into a steady beam. The light flickered once more and then went out entirely, plunging the office into darkness. I muttered a curse under my breath. I fumbled for the switch on the wall, flipping it up and down, but the light remained off. I needed to find a replacement bulb, or maybe the fixture itself was broken. It was just my luck that something like this would happen now, when I was so close to finishing the project. Grumbling, I made my way to the storage closet. The darkness seemed to press in around me as I moved, and I found myself hurrying to get what I needed. I grabbed a new bulb and headed back to the office, the dim emergency lights casting a faint glow that did little to alleviate the oppressive darkness. When I returned, I set up a small desk lamp to provide some light while I worked on replacing the bulb. I unscrewed the old fixture and replaced it with the new one, cursing under my breath as I struggled with the delicate task. Each flicker of the old bulb had made me jump, and I was eager to get the lights working properly again. Finally, the new bulb was in place. I flipped the switch, and the light came on, steady and bright, with none of the erratic flickering. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling a bit foolish for letting a light bulb disrupt my concentration so much. As I settled back into my chair and resumed my work, I glanced around the office. The shadows had disappeared, and the room was once again bathed in a steady, reassuring light. But even as I focused on the task at hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the flickering light was more than just a technical glitch. It felt like a sign, a small disturbance in the calm that had set the tone for the rest of the night. I shook off the thought, trying to convince myself that it was just the fatigue talking. I had a project to finish, and no amount of flickering lights or shadowy corners was going to get in my way. With a determined effort, I refocused on my work, pushing aside the lingering sense of unease. The office was quiet again, the steady light casting a comforting glow as I worked. But as I concentrated on my project, a soft shuffling sound drifted through the open doorway from the hallway. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. I glanced at the clock, 11:30 p.m. It was possible that someone else was still here, working late like I was. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the growing sense of unease. The building was old, and sometimes it settled with strange noises. It was probably just the pipes or the air conditioning playing tricks. I returned to my work, but the shuffling sound continued, accompanied now by what sounded like distant whispers. The noises were too soft to make out clearly, but they seemed to move along the corridor, as if someone was pacing back and forth just outside. Annoyed at myself for letting my imagination run wild, I stood up and walked to the doorway, peering into the dimly lit hallway. It was empty, the faint light from the emergency exits casting long shadows on the walls. I took a deep breath and reassured myself that it was nothing more than the building settling, or maybe a few stragglers finishing their work. Still, the noises persisted, growing more frequent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced around, feeling like I was being watched, but there was no one in sight. I turned back to my desk, my unease settling into a tight knot in my stomach. I tried to focus on my project again, but the whispers and shuffling noises kept pulling my attention away. It was as if the quiet of the office had turned against me, amplifying every little sound and making me question whether I was truly alone. I forced myself to continue working, determined to finish the project despite the growing discomfort. The noises might be nothing more than the building's quirks or the echoes of late-night workers, but the sense of unease remained, gnawing at me and making it harder to ignore the strange occurrences. The noises in the hallway had stopped, but a new, more unsettling sensation had taken their place. As I turned back to my desk, my eyes caught a glimpse of movement in the dimly lit corridor outside. My heart skipped a beat as I saw a dark figure standing there, just beyond the threshold of the light. For a split second, it looked like a shadowy silhouette with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The figure flickered and wavered as if it were made of mist or shadows, shifting with the erratic glow of the hallway lights. It was a fleeting image, but it felt as if it had burned itself into my vision. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage as I stared at the figure. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it a trick of the light? An optical illusion caused by the flickering bulb? Or was it something more sinister? I blinked rapidly, hoping to clear the image from my vision. The figure remained for a moment longer before it seemed to dissolve into the darkness, leaving nothing but the dim light and the now deafening silence. Shaking my head, I tried to dismiss the sight as a figment of my imagination. The flickering lights, the strange noises, perhaps it was all just playing tricks on me. I glanced around the office, trying to reassure myself that everything was normal. The quiet and emptiness of the space suddenly felt oppressive, as if it was closing in on me. I returned to my desk, forcing my hands to steady as I resumed working. I told myself that the figure was nothing more than a trick of the light, a combination of shadows and my own overactive imagination. I took a deep breath, trying to push the unsettling image from my mind. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to focus on my project, but the lingering image of the dark figure kept intruding on my thoughts. Each rustle or creak of the building seemed amplified, and every shadow appeared to move with a life of its own. I forced myself to keep working, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that seemed to hover around me. I needed to finish this project, and I couldn't let a mere apparition, or whatever it was, distract me. But as the minutes ticked by, the image of those glowing eyes seemed to haunt me more and more, making it harder to concentrate and leaving me with a deep, unsettling feeling that I couldn't quite shake. The sudden plunge into darkness took me completely by surprise. One moment, I was hunched over my desk, trying to ignore the gnawing unease that had settled into my bones, and the next, the office was swallowed by an impenetrable blackness. The fluorescent lights above flickered and then went out entirely, leaving me in a stifling silence, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I sat frozen for a moment, trying to adjust to the darkness. My eyes strained to see anything, but it was like staring into an abyss. The office, which had seemed so familiar, now felt alien and threatening. The only sound was the soft hum of the emergency lights kicking in, casting a feeble, eerie glow that barely penetrated the thick darkness. As I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembled uncontrollably. The darkness made everything seem more disorienting, and I struggled to remember where I had left my flashlight. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, each one a reminder of the fear gripping me. Just then, I saw it again, the dark figure. This time it was closer. The outline was more distinct, and the eyes glowed with a more pronounced intensity. They seemed to pierce through the darkness, their unnatural light cutting through the gloom and locking onto me. I couldn't tell if it was moving, or if it was just my own fear distorting my perception, but the figure's presence felt unmistakably menacing. My hands finally found my phone, and I fumbled to turn on the flashlight app. The beam was weak, but enough to cut through some of the darkness. I held it in front of me, my hand shaking so badly that the light wavered and danced across the walls. As the beam of light swept around the room, the figure seemed to retreat, its glowing eyes flickering as if fading into the shadows. My pulse raced as I swung the light back and forth, searching for any sign of movement. The darkness was thick, and despite the small flashlight, it felt like the shadows were closing in on me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The power had gone out, and the backup lights provided little comfort. I needed to stay calm and find out what was happening. My thoughts raced. Was there a security issue? Was someone playing a prank? Or was there something more sinister at work? The figure seemed to have vanished, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still lurking just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I tried to focus on finding the source of the power outage, but my mind kept drifting back to those glowing eyes. I stood up, carefully navigating my way through the darkened office, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the stillness. I headed towards the circuit breaker, hoping it was a simple issue. My flashlight's beam revealed nothing but empty desks and shadowy corners. The darkness felt oppressive, a weight pressing down on my shoulders. Every creak of the building seemed amplified, every shadow more menacing. I moved quickly, trying to ignore the sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm me. I finally reached the circuit breaker and flipped the switch, hoping it would restore the power. After a few tense moments, the lights flickered back on, casting a harsh glare over the office. The familiar hum of the fluorescent lights returned, and the shadows retreated. I glanced around, but the figure was gone. The office looked just as it had before, with no sign of anything out of place. My hands were still trembling as I took a moment to gather myself. The fear that had gripped me was slowly subsiding, but the memory of those glowing eyes lingered, a chilling reminder of the encounter. I knew I wouldn't be able to shake off the unease easily, but for now, the lights were back, and I could focus on finishing my work. The sense of normalcy was a welcome relief, even if the darkness had left its mark on me. The lights flickered back on, their steady hum a welcome sound after the oppressive darkness. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The dark figure was gone, and the office looked normal again, except for the lingering sense of unease. As I cautiously made my way through the office, I noticed a cold draft sweeping through the room. It was strange. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and a shiver ran down my spine. I glanced around, searching for an open window or a draft source, but found nothing. Then, as I moved toward the lobby to check for any signs of disturbance, I caught a faint, burnt smell in the air. It was subtle but distinct, like the scent of something smoldering. I frowned, trying to place it, but the smell seemed to vanish as quickly as it had appeared. Shaking my head, I tried to rationalize the experience. Exhaustion and stress could easily distort perception, I told myself. The flickering lights, the cold draft, and the burnt smell. Perhaps it was all just a result of fatigue playing tricks on me. I was alone in the building late at night, and my mind was likely overactive. Despite my efforts to brush it off, the memory of the glowing eyes lingered in my mind. I forced myself to focus on finishing my work, hoping that the normalcy of the office would help dispel the lingering fear. At home, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling from the office. Desperate for answers, I dove into researching the building's history online. My heart sank when I discovered that the office was built on the site of an old factory where a tragic accident occurred, a fatal fire that claimed several lives. The connection was chilling. Was it possible that the figure I'd seen was linked to this tragic past? The thought made my skin crawl. My paranoia grew, each shadow and noise in my home now seeming to carry a sinister edge. I needed to understand more, but for now the fear was almost overwhelming. Determined to confront my fears, I stayed late at the office again, the security lights casting long, eerie shadows. The building was quiet, the hum of the lights barely audible. My heart raced as I braced myself, hoping to finally get a clear look at the figure. As the minutes ticked by, I saw it. The dark figure appeared once more solid and menacing than before. Its glowing eyes seemed even more intense, and it moved closer with a deliberate, ominous pace. I took a deep breath and tried to confront it, but before I could get a clear view, the figure vanished into thin air. The sudden emptiness left me feeling a profound sense of dread and helplessness. I was alone in the dark, and the fear was more palpable than ever. At work, I decided to confide in a few trusted colleagues about my experiences. To my surprise, they nodded sympathetically, sharing their own unsettling stories about the building. It seemed I wasn't alone in my fears. Determined to get more concrete answers, I reached out to a local paranormal investigator. After listening to my account, they confirmed that the building had a well-known reputation for being haunted, with stories of ghostly apparitions linked to its tragic past. Relief mixed with heightened anxiety washed over me. It was comforting to know I wasn't imagining things, but the confirmation only deepened my sense of dread. I was far from alone in this, and the reality of the situation was more terrifying than I had anticipated. Returning to the office after everything that happened was more difficult than I had imagined. I had hoped that knowing I wasn't alone in my experiences would make it easier, but the fear seemed to cling to me like a shadow. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the lights made my heart race. The dark figure haunted my thoughts, its glowing eyes a persistent image in my mind. I had learned to live with the fear in small, practical ways. I kept the office lights on at all times, even during the day. The soft glow of the fluorescent bulbs, though harsh, offered some comfort against the encroaching darkness. I avoided staying late as much as possible, leaving as soon as the workday was over. The mere thought of being alone in the building after hours filled me with dread. At home, the fear seeped into my daily life. I found myself double-checking locks and keeping the lights on in every room. Sleep eluded me, as every shadow in my bedroom seemed to twist into the shape of the dark figure. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, convinced I had heard a sound or seen a movement. Interactions with others became strained. I tried to act normal, but the fear had altered my perception of reality. I was jumpy, always on edge, and it was beginning to take a toll on my relationships. Friends and family noticed my unease but couldn't fully understand the source of it. I tried to explain, but words seemed inadequate to convey the depth of the fear that had settled within me. My work performance began to suffer. The constant worry and lack of sleep affected my concentration, making me more prone to mistakes. I felt like I was living in a state of heightened anxiety, where every little sound and every shadow took on a menacing quality. The office, once a familiar and safe place, now felt like a battleground between my sanity and my fears. Despite the ongoing anxiety, I forced myself to go through the motions of daily life. I spoke with the paranormal investigator again, seeking advice on how to cope with the lingering fear. They suggested various methods for grounding and protection, but none seemed to offer complete relief. The dark figure's presence had become a part of my reality, a persistent reminder of something beyond my understanding. I tried to focus on the positive aspects of my life, clinging to the small comforts and routines that helped me manage my anxiety. I would spend time with friends and family, engage in activities I enjoyed, and practice relaxation techniques. Yet, no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the fear remained, a constant companion. Living with this fear had changed me. It had shifted my perception of reality and made me question what I once considered normal. I was no longer the person who could work late into the night without a second thought. I was more cautious, more aware of the darkness around me. The dark figure had left an indelible mark on my life, one that would forever alter my understanding of the world.